I'm just so happy that everyone's here and there's so many friends and family in the room. So I'm gonna ask a couple questions and then open it up because there's so many people I love in this room who I know are gonna have smarter things to say than me probably. First, I just want to say that, you know, I didn't mention this to you when we just went for dinner, but I've been thinking about this movie a lot lately. Randomly, something happened to me that has brought this movie back into my life. For people who know, there's a lot of people who know me here. I'm Iranian. I was having this meeting with this Iranian diplomat, and towards the end of the meeting, the person was saying the most important thing that we can do, because right now in Iran, we have this situation where women are being raped and murdered and men are being killed and students are being killed, artists are being killed. And the most important thing that we can do is, with this revolution, tell the people who are perpetrating these crimes that we're going to forgive them if they step on the right side of history, that there's not, that there's a way for growth. Because right now in the revolution in Iran, there's young people fighting, say, we're going to kill these people when we get our country back and blah, blah, blah. And this really intelligent person was saying that we need to tell them that we're going to forgive them. And that's the only way that we're going to be able to move forward. That's the only way that we're going to be able to maybe even get our revolution. And that's the only way that we can really heal our collective trauma. And that got me thinking about your film again. And then it also got me thinking about all the other different nations and civilizations and cultures who have had collective trauma and have not been able to heal properly because they haven't been able to forgive. And I think about your movie and what is it specifically that you want to say about forgiveness in your film?
Well, it's funny that you start there because that was the big genesis for why I wrote this story. My dad worked for the UN and was working with the First Lady of Rwanda in Rwanda on instituting a national forgiveness program because they went through a very just bloody civil war, and I just didn't understand how that was going to be possible. And so he connected me with a woman who was running an NGO, and I was able to meet survivors and to understand, you know, I heard their stories and all of them were horrific, and I started asking myself, how does one start over? How does one heal from this kind of trauma? Is it possible to start over again? And I wanted to really look at that from the perspective of child soldiers, because for me, all children are innocent. But when you put them in the situation where, you know, you're committing atrocities out of survival, how do you then, is it even possible for you to piece your life back together? And I was so interested in who these children became and how they processed their trauma. And there weren't any films about that. And I thought, well, this is something I want to talk about because I think it's so important in the context of what you're discussing. It's not just about this story, it's so universal. I presented this film also in Albania, where there were like people from Kosovo and Ukrainians, and you can apply this to almost any country, any place, any situation, and it, you know, and so I wanted to put out a message of hope, I guess, or I wanted to just get people talking about some of the difficult things that we don't get to talk about, whether that's, you know, personal trauma, family trauma, anything, you know, so that was what was at the forefront for me.
And I also, because I know you well, I know that you're an actor, and this is obviously your feature directorial debut, and you know acting very well, and I want to ask you a little bit about how you cast, what's important to you with actors. I think you have two incredible performances in this film where people really lay down their souls and they really, you know, putting something at stake for you. How you set the temperature for that to occur, all of that.
I'm such a gut person with actors, especially. I mean, in general, I feel it if it's right, you know, I feel it right away. And with Babetita, I saw her in a trailer of a film. She didn't have a word. She didn't speak a word. She turned to camera. That was it. I was like, her. her whole being, she's so present, so magnetic, and And I hadn't even thought of this story yet. She had her hooks in me. And then a year later, I was on set with Suleiman. We were acting in a short together. And I'd seen him in a beautiful film called Goodbye Solo. And I was just like, why aren't you working more? Like, he's such a beautiful actor, so much presence. And it's really hard for actors of color, particularly if you're an immigrant, particularly if you have an accent. It's so hard to get opportunities. And I thought, well, I'm in film school. I'm an immigrant. I really want to create a role for him that I think will help show people what he's capable of. So I started developing the role of Father Patrick for him. And immediately when I started writing Marie, I thought back to Babetita, and I offered her the role. I didn't even audition her. I just gave it to her because I knew she had it. Mm-hmm. So it was really just trusting my gut and trusting what I felt, you know.
Yeah, smart. Questions for, I'm happy to open it up. Yes, Kate.
So in the storyline, when I was convinced that maybe she did get the wrong guy, and I was curious, like it kind of really was an amazing moment when you decided to have that turn when he starts to admit it, and I was like, no. And how did you, when you were creating the story, how did you decide to develop that moment, and how did you piece together this story?
I mean, I always knew that I wanted the audience to think she was crazy. So I had to build up to that place. Like I had to keep it going long enough so that you would start to doubt whether she was right. And because he's so adamant and his performance is so convincing, then you're like, she is really crazy. And so I always saw the midpoint of the story being when the truth comes out. And then the film can sort of change into something else. And it's funny, this film, more than anything I've ever written, has been a big surprise, because I started writing it thinking this is sort of just a typical revenge thriller, but there was nothing typical about how the story unfolded. And especially once I knew that reveal was going to happen in the midpoint, then it had to be about something else, you know, because then why does she keep him alive as long as she does? And that then it really became interesting for me in the exploration of the themes of forgiveness and the themes of, you know, of redemption as well.
Anyone else? Yeah, Alex.
So with the prayer at the end, how did you come to that? Because that moved me so much. With them standing as he approached and he was in this blanket. How did you come to
That final scene was the hardest scene for me to write. I didn't know for a very long time how the film was gonna end. And I think it wasn't until I wrote a draft from the perspective of Father Patrick, and I started thinking a lot about his arc and where he was in his faith. And for me, that scene is when he actually becomes a priest. And so I thought, well, this is the moment where the sermon is actually, you know, coming from this deeper place, you know.
that hit me.
Good, thank you.
Yes.
Meant at all as a political protest against these wars in Africa and elsewhere with child soldiers?
Yeah, you could view it that way. I mean, I don't know that I was thinking, I'm sorry. Were you
Yeah, I think, did you make it in that lens?
I don't know that I think maybe subconsciously, but it wasn't like, oh, this is the political message that I want to put forward. I think it's also my way of wanting to put out, to make people think more about what we're actually doing and also how we are, because I feel like we judge people, we judge ourselves, each other so harshly. You know, when you meet people from different walks of life, you don't know what anyone is coming from, where anyone is coming from. You don't know what baggage they're carrying. So for me, this film was really about just have more empathy, open yourself up a little bit more to try to understand where someone else is coming from. And beyond that, it's, you know, it's what people can pull from it. If that's what people get, that yes, it is an anti-war film in a way. Yeah, I guess it is. Yeah.
Go for it, Charlie.
First of all, congratulations in this
Thank
film.
you.
It kept me so very engaging, you know. My question is, when did you start writing it, and the timeline of how, when did you start shooting, and then the post?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I started writing it in 2015, and it was, the first version was set in the US, and it didn't work, and I didn't know why. So I put it down for 4 years, and I was trying to make another movie that I couldn't get off the ground. And then these characters started talking to me at the beginning of 2019. And then I had a dream where the answer came to me that it was the location that was wrong. So I changed it to France. And then I got funding right away. I rewrote the draft like that summer. And summer of 2019, November of 2019, I got the money to make the movie, which was very fast. And then the pandemic hit. So there was another year of just like, which was actually a blessing, because I got to work with my actors a lot more. And I'm someone who's a big backstory person, particularly for this movie, because there's a shared history that they have. And I think it has to be so specific. And so we spent 6 months really driving the backstory of every single character, because I'm somebody, there was, all the performances for me were really full. Even the Sabine, who played the manager of the retirement home, like I worked with every actor to build where they were coming from, what their lives were. And then we shot in the summer of 2021. And Venice wanted a cut. I shot from June 8th to 20 days. So I remember we wrapped July 2nd, and Venice wanted a cut July 15th. And I went, we'll send them something. It's not gonna be good, and they're not gonna take the movie, and then I can sleep and then actually put the film together. We sent them a rough cut July 15th. And they were like, yes, we want the movie. And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? So then I didn't sleep for another 2 months, and we just like got the film ready, and it premiered in September of that year, which is insane.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Fire voice.
Yeah, first, congrats for the deep dig you have had.
Incredible.
Characters.
Thank
So,
you.
My question, you're an actor and a screenwriter at the same time. So the question is, other than the political lens and layers you got on the field, so there are two human, and that interaction, let's say sick interaction, as an actor, have you ever been thinking about sexuality? What happened to a 12 years girl for first experience of sexuality? And that guy, God's, let's say God's man on earth. Have you ever thought about the deep feeling they might have after being released, or at the moment of?
So tricky, because this is not my personal story. I've never experienced this. And so I think as an actor, one of the most powerful things is this, the as if, you know, that just using your imagination and feeling through. I wrote this, I think the only way I can describe it is that I put myself in the shoes of Marie, and I tried to imagine what that was. But it honestly, it only is filled in because of Fabicita Saggio, my actress, who unfortunately has her own kind of history with this kind of thing. And I think that because of that, she was able to fill in what you're talking about, which I couldn't, I mean, it was there on the page, but you know, like, I don't even know that I could fully imagine what that would be, you know, and that's why.
Because simultaneously we're having the story with the other guy
Yeah.
and offering the passionate sex instead of like rapes. So these two would be in comparison together at the same time.
Well, I feel that you understand it because you have that other storyline. If that other storyline hadn't been there, you wouldn't have understood the effect of her sexual trauma.
Yeah.
And so, you know, often when people watch the film, at first they're a little confused why it's there or why I start the film there. And then when you get to that scene, when you understood what this has done to her as a woman with, you know, the barriers that she has physically, emotionally, sexually, then you understand why that the juxtaposition between the normalcy that she's after and her trauma, like why it has to be there. For me, as a writer and as an actor, that those two things had to be sort of side by side.
Thank you.
I just want to end it with, this film is obviously, I think, a bit of a miracle. You know, you made it, you know, with some pretty heavy constraints, and then you're able to premiere at Venice, and then you don't have the marketing powers. You get an Indie Spirit nomination with, again, some really strong films, and I know what you're doing next and the slate you have. And I guess what I want to say is, like, where do you feel like we're at in American cinema right now? Where do you want us to go? Like, you just made this film. I listen to so many filmmakers can't make their first film or make their first film, you know, in these impossible situations. You were able to do it, maybe through France, whatnot, and then you're able to sort of start up this whole career for yourself. As you said, it didn't know that the Red Sea has opened. Where do you feel like we're at, and what do we need? I don't know if this is a question, more of a statement, but I guess if you just want to talk on what do you want for the American film industry?
I don't know. It's like such a... First, we need to get through this strike.
Yeah.
It's kind of scary. I feel like, you know, independent cinema is dwindling, has been dwindling for, you know, a long time. I feel like, you know, either you're making a film under, I don't know, under $2 or $3 million, or you're making a really big movie. I feel like those mid-budget films are disappearing. I think it's just become really tough, a really tough landscape, even on the distribution side. I mean, it took a long time for us to get distribution, almost a year and change, a year and a couple months. But I've heard other stories that it's not uncommon for even films out of Sundance. I had friends out of Sundance who didn't get distribution. Even getting a theatrical release nowadays is really, really, I mean, I consider myself very blessed. And I'm sure the Indie Spirit nomination helped a lot in that department, but I don't know. I feel like I would like, you know, I think part of the reason I've got a foot in Europe is because they take more risks there, and I feel that I can really exercise my voice as an artist through, you know, funding there. And I would hope when I look at somebody like Yorgos Lanthimos, I'm really excited about his new film. I'm like, this is so exciting to see, you know, unique, you know, voices, people who are pushing boundaries, who are making things that feel really fresh and don't feel formulaic. But there's less and less of that kind of stuff coming out of America. It's just not, I don't know what the answer is. I just know that we need to really push to keep being creative, to keep supporting independent voices. Because otherwise we're, you know, I don't know, there's not much left to see. It's like blockbuster after blockbuster, you know, so.
Great, well, thank you guys so much for coming.
Yeah,
We're gonna chill in the lobby for a bit.